Hello, my YouTube family, especially to all the young night owls tuning in. Welcome back to Crime Whisper, your quiet corner for true crime stories that stay with you. I know many of you use these videos to unwind or fall asleep, so take a deep breath, get comfortable, and relax. Before we begin tonight's case, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me bring you more stories just like this one. Also, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Alright, let's begin. This is Case 1, the story of Susan Lucille Wright. Susan Lucille Wright was born on April 24, 1976, in Houston, Texas, to her parents Velma Sue and Jimmy Lawrence Wright. She was the eldest of 2 children and had a younger sister named Cindy. As a child, Susan was sociable, lively, and had a deep, creative streak. She especially loved dancing and dreamed of one day becoming a choreographer. With her graceful looks and slender build, she naturally drew attention and enjoyed being in the spotlight. After high school, Susan hoped to attend college, but didn't get accepted right away. Determined to earn money for her education, she took a job as a dancer at a popular nightclub, performing in partial silence and under low lights. Eventually, she left that job and used her savings to enroll in evening nursing classes to support herself. She also worked as a waitress, but over time, Susan realized nursing wasn't her true passion. The financial burden became overwhelming, and she decided to stop her classes and focus fully on working. In the summer of 1997, at just 21 years old, Susan met the man who would change her life forever, Jeffrey Andrew Wright. He was 8 years older and met her while dining at the restaurant where she worked in Galveston. He was instantly drawn to her bright smile and made a habit of sitting in her section, always leaving generous tips. Before long, he asked for her number and began calling her regularly, sometimes multiple times a day. He arranged romantic dates, sent flowers with sweet notes, and even walked her home in the evenings. Susan was smitten. Despite their age difference, Jeffrey was charming, attentive, and seemed devoted. But beneath the surface, there were red flags. Susan soon discovered that Jeffrey had a history of substance abuse. He claimed to be clean and promised to stop drinking altogether. Young and in love, Susan believed him, convinced that love could fix anything. Then came unexpected news: was pregnant. She shared it with Jeffrey, who appeared happy, but didn't offer to move in or propose. That left Susan confused. She decided to take control and told him she wanted their child to be born into a married home. Jeffrey agreed. By the time they got married, Susan was 8 months pregnant. It was a quiet ceremony, with no guests or fanfare. Shortly afterward, they bought a home in a quiet suburb of Harris County, Texas. In December 1998, they welcomed their first child, a baby boy named Bradley. A few years later, in the spring of 2002, their daughter Kay was born. On the surface, everything looked perfect. Jeffrey worked at a construction company, and Susan became a full-time mom. Neighbors described her as sweet, sociable, and attentive. She loved her children, adored her dog Buck, and kept a tidy home. But behind closed doors, Susan's life was anything but peaceful. Escalating domestic abuse tone remains gentle, but grave. Jeffrey was controlling in nearly every aspect. He demanded home-cooked meals daily, no leftovers or pre-prepared dishes allowed. He insisted on clean clothes each day and refused to wear the same outfit twice. If Susan failed to meet his expectations, she faced verbal abuse, humiliation, and physical punishment. He gave her just $100 a week to cover all household expenses, diapers, cleaning supplies, and expected her to provide receipts for every purchase. And despite his earlier promises, Jeffrey hadn't stopped drinking. In fact, he'd started using drugs again, excusing it as a way to manage stress from work. The substances made him unpredictable and violent. He began lashing out, not just at Susan, but even at their young son. Susan's in-laws were aware of the abuse, but felt helpless. Susan, isolated and overwhelmed, had nowhere to turn. The violence escalated emotionally, physically, and intimately. Jeffrey trained in boxing 3 times a week, and sometimes Susan feared he would seriously hurt her or the children. Then came the night of January 13th, 2003. The night everything changed. Whispered intensity. Jeffrey came home from the gym, agitated and short-tempered. As Susan prepared dinner, he tried to teach their 5-year-old son some boxing moves. But he lost control, striking the child hard enough to make him cry. Susan saw everything, and though she stayed quiet in that moment, she had seen enough. After dinner, she put the children to bed. What happened next is told in 2 very different versions. Susan claimed that when she entered the bedroom, Jeffrey attacked her. She said he tried to rape her and came at her with a knife. In the struggle, she said, she managed to grab the blade and defend herself. But investigators later heard a more calculated story. They believed Susan used seduction to lower Jeffrey's guard. Wearing a silk robe, she invited him into a role-play scenario, something intimate. She suggested tying him to the bed. He agreed, using 3 of his own neckties and the sash from her robe. She restrained him. She even placed her underwear in his mouth as a gag, pretending it was part of the game. She lit candles and turned off the lights. The room was quiet and dimmed at first. Jeffrey thought it was a harmless game. But then, she poured hot wax on his chest, and things quickly turned dark. Susan poured candle wax onto Jeffrey's most sensitive areas. The pain was excruciating. He struggled against the restraints, trying desperately to scream, but the gag silenced him. Then, Susan left the room and returned with a small kitchen knife. She began stabbing him, starting at his groin, moving upward along his legs, arms, chest, neck, and finally, his face. The stabbing was slow at first, deliberate. With each wound, she recounted the pain, the insults, the abuse she had endured. Every motion was an emotional release. She began to cry. The stabbing quickened. Later, forensic experts would count 193 knife wounds on Jeffrey's body. Most of them were shallow, not immediately fatal, meaning he was likely conscious through much of it. Her defense team would later argue that Susan entered a dissociative state, a moment of emotional explosion, where she lost the ability to stop herself. She wasn't thinking clearly. They said she hadn't planned what to do next. There was no escape plan. After Jeffrey was dead, Susan sat beside his body for hours, in silence. Eventually, as dawn approached, she noticed the mess. The room was soaked in blood sheets, walls, carpet. That's when she remembered something. Just days earlier, Jeffrey had dug a shallow pit in their backyard, planning to install a decorative fountain. That hole, Susan decided, would become his grave, cover up soft tone with controlled intensity in the quietest hours of the night. Susan checked outside through the blinds. No neighbors in sight. Using a garden wheelbarrow, she somehow managed to move Jeffrey's body from the bedroom, through the house, and into the yard. Though she was a petite woman, she lifted a man twice her size, a fact that raised questions for investigators later. Was she alone? Did someone help her? No accomplice was ever confirmed. She placed the body in the pit and covered it with a thin layer of dirt. Back inside, Susan began cleaning. She stripped the bed, removed the curtains, and stuffed the blood-stained fabrics into trash bags. She scattered them into multiple bins across the neighborhood. The mattress was too soaked to salvage, so she flipped it over. But the blood had seeped into the floor, the carpet, the baseboards. She scrubbed relentlessly, bleach, hot water, whatever she could find. Still, a large stain remained. Later, she would try to explain the chemical smell as Jeffrey spilling bleach during a fight. The disappearance distant and emotional tone with the house scrubbed and her husband buried. Susan called his parents in Austin, Texas. She was in tears. She told them Jeffrey had been violent. He had attacked her and their son, spilled bleach on the carpet during the chaos, and then stormed out. He was gone. She said their relationship was over. Jeffrey's parents were deeply concerned. They knew their son had flaws, but this was shocking. Still, they offered support. They told Susan she and the children could stay with them. She declined. She said she needed space to process everything and promised to go to the police. 2 days later she did. Susan walked into the police station and reported her husband missing. She told officers that he had been abusive and that she feared for her life and the safety of their children. She was granted a restraining order, even though she already knew he would never return. She showed the police bruises on her arms and a small mark on her face, claiming Jeffrey had attacked her with his keys during their last fight. She painted a picture of a woman trapped, broken, and finally free. For a moment, they believed her. Suspicions grow quiet, eerie pacing. But something didn't add up. Jeffrey had vanished without a trace. No phone, no wallet, no car, no contact with his employer, his family, or his friends. It was as though he had simply ceased to exist. Susan's behavior began to shift, too. She said she couldn't stay in the house, it felt haunted. She was convinced Jeffrey would somehow come back. Even their dog, Buck, barked endlessly at the backyard. He dug at the soil where the shallow grave lay hidden. On January 17th, Susan went to her mother's house with the children. That's when everything changed. Her mother, Velma, had sensed something was wrong for days. But now, seeing her daughter up close, she asked the question outright. "Did you kill Jeffrey?" Susan broke down in tears and nodded. She confessed. The grave was in the backyard. Still overwhelmed and unsure, Susan followed her mother's advice and contacted a lawyer, Neil Davis. She told him everything: the killing, the cleanup, the fear, the regret. Davis listened carefully and then reached out to the Harris County District Attorney. On January 19, 2003, Susan's confession was formally reported to authorities. She agreed to give a full statement. The confession, haunting and psychological, toned 5 days later. On January 24th, Susan walked into the police station again, this time not as a victim, but as a killer. Her confession was fragmented, confused. Sometimes she spoke of Jeffrey as if he were still alive. She said she feared he might hurt her again. She asked for protection. Police ordered a psychiatric evaluation. The results showed that Susan had suffered a nervous breakdown. She was depressed, emotionally unstable, but still mentally competent. She understood what she had done. When investigators arrived at the right residence, they found the grave. What they uncovered shocked even the most seasoned officers. Jeffrey's body showed signs of a prolonged, agonizing death. He had been bound by the wrists and ankles, marks deeply imprinted into his flesh. The restraints were still on when he was buried. A total of 193 knife wounds were counted scattered across his legs, chest, arms, abdomen, neck, and face. Most of them were shallow, suggesting they were meant to inflict pain, not kill. Only one wound located on his head was deemed fatal. Candle wax was found on his chest and groin. Susan later claimed it had been an accident, that he had knocked over a candle during the struggle. But prosecutors argued otherwise. They said it was deliberate, a calculated act of torture. Further examination of Jeffrey's body revealed even more disturbing details. He had been gagged, his wife's underwear placed in his mouth to silence his screams. Toxicology reports showed that Jeffrey had alcohol and multiple controlled substances in his system at the time of his death. Experts suggested this may have made him more volatile or unpredictable. At first glance, the bedroom where the incident occurred appeared relatively normal except for one obvious detail: a large bleach stain on the carpet. But once investigators used chemical reagents and forensic tools, the truth became visible. Blood had been everywhere. Traces appeared on the walls, ceiling, even soaked deep into the mattress. Susan had spent hours cleaning up the aftermath of what had been a violent and extended attack. TheTrial.com methodical tone with emotional nuance. Susan Wright's trial began in late February 2004. By then, she had already spent over a year in custody. Her children were being looked after by her mother and her sister Cindy. Her defense attorney, Neil Davis, had worked tirelessly to build her case. Throughout the proceedings, Susan often broke down in tears as she described the years of abuse she said she endured. She told the court how Jeffrey had come home from boxing training that night in an agitated state. He had tried to show their 5-year-old son, Bradley, some aggressive techniques. When the child resisted, Jeffrey struck him. Later that evening, after putting the children to bed, Susan claimed she tried to have a serious conversation with Jeffrey, begging him to seek help. Instead, she said, he became enraged, grabbed his keys, and tried to leave. When she blocked his path, a struggle began. She said he hit her hard enough to knock her down. When she got up, she claimed Jeffrey had a knife. But her story began to shift. Her memory was inconsistent. She claimed she grabbed the knife in fear. She admitted to tying Jeffrey up after the fight, and she insisted the candle wax had been spilled by accident. But she couldn't explain why her underwear was found stuffed into her husband's mouth. The prosecution, soft but resolute delivery. The prosecution painted a very different picture. They argued that the restraints, the neckties, and the silk belt were premeditated, that Jeffrey had been tied up before any physical struggle began. Forensic evidence showed that all the stab wounds had been delivered from above, suggesting Susan had been on top of him while he lay on his back, helpless. The angle and pattern of the wounds didn't match a chaotic fight, they matched a methodical execution. They also pointed to the pit in the backyard, the one Jeffrey had dug just days before, intended for a decorative fountain. The prosecution argued that Susan had used it as a ready-made grave and that this showed planning, not panic. They speculated that Susan's motive may have included financial gain, a life insurance policy, freedom from abuse, or both. The case captured national attention. The media branded her with chilling nicknames like the Blue-Eyed Butcher and the Blonde Meat Grinder, while Jeffrey's family demanded justice. Some neighbors expressed sympathy for Susan. They remembered seeing her with bruises brushed off as clumsy accidents, but perhaps now seen in a different light. Initially, the state sought a life sentence, but eventually, they reduced their request to 45 years. In March 2004, Susan was found guilty of murder. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. When the verdict was read, Susan showed little reaction. She remained distant and emotionally numb. Appeals and release, soft, reflective tone. Her first appeal was denied. Then, in 2008, a second appeal introduced surprising new testimony. Misty McElroy, the ex-fiancée of Jeffrey Wright and wife of former NFL player Steve McElroy, came forward. She told the court about her own past with Jeffrey, how he had abused her, humiliated her, and frightened her enough to end their engagement years earlier. With this new character testimony and pressure for a reevaluation of Susan's mental state, her sentence was reduced from 25 to 20 years. Susan became eligible for parole in 2014. At the age of 38, it was denied. She tried again in 2017 and was denied once more. After serving 16 years behind bars. Susan Wright was released in the winter of 2020 at age 44. Her release made headlines. Photographers and reporters surrounded her. Susan, overwhelmed and tearful, asked to be left alone. Her case had been televised, dissected, and sensationalized, but behind the labels, behind the headlines, was a tragic and complicated story, one that blurred the line between victim and perpetrator. Transition slow and quiet pause before next case. Now take a deep breath. We're about to shift to another story, one equally heartbreaking and just as haunting. This is the case of Shannon Starbuck. Shannon Starbuck case, soft, ominous tone. Shannon Starbuck was a 42-year-old mother of 5. Born on April 19, 1969, in Anderson, Indiana, the youngest of 3 siblings. Her early life was shaped by her parents' divorce and their eventual remarriages, which brought even more siblings into her world. On the morning of December 3, 2011, Shannon was found dead lying on the floor of her bedroom in a disturbingly suggestive position. An erotic massager had been deliberately placed on her stomach, a final act of humiliation. Her body bore numerous bruises and abrasions. A later medical exam confirmed the presence of stun gun injuries and determined that her body had been moved post-mortem. Cause of death: strangulation. Investigation begins. Methodical and eerie tone. The investigation began with a complex timeline. Detectives had to reconstruct Shannon's final hours and figure out who had the motive, means, and opportunity. The first to report her missing was her ex-husband Clay Starbuck. Clay, then 47, contacted police after he had been unable to reach Shannon for 2 days. He said the last time he heard from her was around 3 p.m. on December 1st. That day, Shannon texted one of their daughters saying she felt sick and wouldn't be able to pick up the kids from school. She asked them to wait for their father, claiming she had already told him, but Clay said his phone had been off. He hadn't gotten the message. The children, Marshall and Serena, waited, tired and hungry. Eventually, their older sister Logan called their eldest brother, Austin, asking for help. Austin drove over, picked them up, and brought them to their father's house nearby. Clay was surprised but happy to have his kids. He didn't contact Shannon. This kind of miscommunication wasn't unusual between them. He expected to see her at a school basketball game that evening, but she never showed up the next day, on December 2nd. Clay brought the kids to school and then drove to Shannon's house. The blinds were drawn, the front door was locked, and Shannon was nowhere to be found. The murder of Shannon Starbuck, a family torn apart. Clay couldn't get inside. He had a key, but the door wouldn't open. Growing worried, he sent a message to Shannon, his ex-wife, warning that if she didn't show up by 7 p.m., he would report her missing. When that time came and passed without a response, Clay went to the local police station to file a report. 2 sheriff's deputies were dispatched to Shannon Starbuck's home. They found nothing out of place, no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a break-in, and returned to the station. The officers advised Clay to wait 1 more day, then come back if he still hadn't heard from her. The next day Clay did return, and this time, he wasn't the only one. A friend of Shannon's and her mother had also come forward, saying they couldn't get in touch with her either, something completely out of character for Shannon. With multiple people expressing concern, and 48 hours already passed since she was last seen, authorities began to take the case more seriously. Officers went back to Shannon's home for a second check. Again, nothing appeared unusual until they entered the bedroom. Inside, they uncovered a horrific scene. The bed was unmade, the mattress cover was stained red, and the fitted sheet was missing. A blanket lay crumpled nearby. Her phone and diary sat untouched on the dresser. Forensic teams combed the room. They discovered 12 latent fingerprints on a massager box and the bathroom mirror, but many other surfaces had been meticulously wiped clean. DNA was recovered from common areas, and forensic technicians took scrapings from under Shannon's fingernails, face, and neck. Detectives theorized that Shannon had been killed shortly after taking a shower. Her body had been moved from the bed to the floor. The missing bedsheet was later recovered from the washing machine, leading investigators to believe the killer had attempted to clean up the crime scene. Around noon, Clay arrived at Shannon's home. What he saw stopped him cold. Yellow crime scene tape, police cruisers, and an ambulance in the driveway. He was the first to be informed of the tragic discovery. Detectives questioned him. After calming down, Clay explained their post-divorce arrangement. He would drop the younger kids at school in the morning, and Shannon would pick them up. But on December 1st, his car had broken down just blocks from his house. He texted Shannon, asking her to handle the school drop-off by 11 a.m. He expected the temperature to rise enough to restart the car. but it never did. He gave up, went inside, and took a nap. His phone battery died during that time. Clay provided his phone to investigators, shared the text exchanges with Shannon, and fully cooperated by submitting fingerprints and DNA. He also spoke openly about Shannon's life after their divorce. She had joined dating websites and, as an attractive woman, attracted plenty of attention. According to Clay, it was possible one of her admirers had something to do with her death, though he couldn't name anyone specific. He broke down in tears during the interview, unable to process her murder. After his statement, Clay was sent home with the devastating task of breaking the news to their children. The investigation unfolds. The police launched a full investigation, beginning with interviews of neighbors. They asked about strange vehicles, unfamiliar visitors, and any unusual activity in recent weeks. The autopsy revealed the brutal nature of Shannon's death. She had suffered severe chest trauma consistent with a stun gun, 10 broken ribs, and extensive head and body injuries caused by a blunt object. Her neck bones were broken, consistent with being moved, and her body bore signs of manual strangulation, likely with a soft item like a towel or sheet. Pinpointing the exact time of death was difficult due to the extent of the injuries, but medical examiners estimated she died sometime between December 1st and 2nd. A critical piece of evidence came from DNA collected at the scene. It belonged to a man, potentially one of Shannon's close male acquaintances. That narrowed the pool of suspects to people like Clay, or perhaps someone she had been romantically involved with. Clay once again cooperated. He underwent a full medical exam to check for any signs of struggle, such as scratches or bruises, but he showed no injuries on his hands or arms. Investigators turned their attention to their 2 adult sons, 21-year-old Austin and 18-year-old Blake. The only physical concern was some old cuts on Austin's hands, explained by his job at a window manufacturing plant. Both sons shared that they had known their mother was dating again, and they disapproved. They had seen explicit photos on her laptop and feared she might have fallen victim to someone she met online. Still, they loved their mother deeply and were shaken by her murder. Family history. The woman behind the headlines. As the investigation progressed, detectives needed to understand who Shannon Starbuck really was. Friends and relatives painted a portrait of a deeply loving mother who had always dreamed of a big, happy family. She was kind, artistic, and known for her drawings. She had even won awards for her talent. At 20, she met Clay Starbuck, a 25-year-old diesel mechanic from Alaska, while he was on vacation in Florida. He was already divorced with 2 children, but Shannon wasn't deterred. She saw his experience as a strength, not a flaw. They married quickly, and Shannon moved to Alaska. Adjusting wasn't easy, especially the climate, but she threw herself into her new life. She became a mother to Clay's children, and later gave birth to 3 of her own, Austin, Blake, and then a daughter, Logan, who was diagnosed with autism. Shannon became Logan's closest companion. Their family was completed with the birth of another daughter, Serena. 2 outsiders. Shannon appeared to be the picture of a devoted wife and mother, but cracks formed beneath the surface. Clay's long absences for work strained the relationship, and Shannon eventually discovered he was having an affair. The betrayal was devastating. In 2000, Shannon filed for divorce and tried to rebuild her life in Arizona. She attempted to date again, but realized she still had feelings for Clay. They reconnected in 2001, and she moved back, hoping for a second chance. But happy endings don't always come. What followed was a storm of heartbreak, suspicion, and, ultimately, tragedy. Who killed Shannon Starbuck? Was it a stranger from her online dating life? Or was the danger far closer than anyone had realized? The answers would emerge, but only after months of painful investigation, betrayals, and unexpected revelations. Shannon Starbuck and her ex-husband Clay had 4 children together, and in time, welcomed a Marshall. But rather than bringing them closer, Marshall's birth only deepened the cracks in their already fragile relationship. Though they remarried in 2006, the tension between them never truly dissolved. 6 months later, the family relocated to Deer Park, Washington. Job required frequent travel, leaving Shannon to manage the household and care for the children on her own. Despite the challenges, she kept the home filled with energy, organizing family outings and hosting gatherings. But the long periods of separation weighed heavily on their marriage. Trust eroded, and in 2010, they divorced for good. Now, in her 40s, Shannon was determined to rebuild her life and avoid the missteps of the past. Though she supported Clay after a serious injury, she made it clear she had no intention of reuniting. Still, when Clay left his job and moved back to Deer Park in early 2011 to be closer to the children, he hoped for reconciliation. However, had found her freedom and wasn't willing to give it up again. After Clay's surgery, their sons Austin and Blake moved in with him, enjoying some independence from their mother. Meanwhile, Shannon embraced a fresh start. She took on a part-time job, enrolled in a dental assistant program, and began to stabilize her life financially, especially since Clay had stopped paying child support. The kids spent Wednesdays and alternating weekends with their father. By late summer, Shannon had completed her certification and was ready to focus on new goals. She created an online dating profile, hoping to find someone who truly appreciated her. After years of heartache, she was finally beginning to heal. But all that hope ended one cold December morning when Shannon Starbuck became the victim of a brutal and deliberate crime. Her funeral was held on December 10, 2011. Attended by a large crowd, testament to her warmth and the impact she had on those around her. She was laid to rest in a cemetery in Orlando. With the case attracting public attention, the investigation moved quickly. Detectives began by verifying Clay's alibi for December 1st. His fingerprints didn't match those found at the crime scene, so investigators turned to Shannon's phone, laptop, and diary to uncover new leads. Several men she'd interacted with on a dating site became persons of interest. One was Tom Walker, who had planned a date with Shannon on December 5th. Their messages had grown flirtatious, but when he requested a suggestive photo involving an adult toy, Shannon declined. Disturbingly, her body was later found posed in a way eerily similar to what Walker had described. Within an hour of this discovery, detectives located Tom Walker. He was visibly shaken by the news of Shannon's death and fully cooperative. His whereabouts were confirmed by surveillance footage and colleagues eliminating him as a suspect. Next came John Wilson, who had arranged to meet Shannon on December 1st. Upon further investigation, police learned that Wilson's real name was John Kinlan. He had lied about his identity, his job, and his marital status. Though his behavior was deceitful, he also had a verified alibi and was cleared after providing a DNA sample. With few leads left, detectives took another close look at Shannon's phone and uncovered a crucial clue: a 911 call made from her device on the morning of her murder. Though deleted from her call log, the audio was recovered. It captured only the sound of sobbing and movement, before abruptly cutting out. Further phone records showed 11 messages sent from her phone after her death attempts to mislead those close to her. GPS confirmed the phone had stayed at her home, the murder scene. The killer had tried to conceal their tracks, but the digital evidence told another story. The investigation circled back to someone painfully close: Clay Starbuck. He had motive, he knew her routines, and he had a history. Police reviewed surveillance footage of his car movements and found discrepancies in his original account. Contrary to his claim, his car hadn't broken down. The final blow came with DNA analysis. Biological material recovered from Shannon's body matched. Clay's detectives believed that a confrontation unfolded when Shannon returned home from dropping the kids off at school. The argument escalated, and in a fit of rage, Clay killed her. The grotesque staging of her body appeared to be a final, vengeful act, punishment for moving on without him. Even more chilling, Clay remained at the house after the murder, using her phone to send deceptive messages. Evidence emerged, suggesting that this wasn't a spontaneous act, it had been premeditated. Shannon had confided in friends that she feared Clay's controlling behavior and believed he was capable of violence. Between June and November 2011, she had contacted police multiple times, reporting that Clay was stalking her and making her feel unsafe. She became so paranoid that she refused to give anyone a spare key to her home. Eventually, she filed a restraining order, limiting their communication to text. Her diary entries were heartbreaking. She feared him and believed he was turning the children against her. Clay had spread cruel rumors, painting her as promiscuous to sabotage her relationships and reputation. When he was arrested on February 6, 2012, the children stood by him, despite damning evidence including a hidden tracking program on Shannon's laptop, documents found in Clay's home, and damning messages. His older children refused to believe he was capable of such horror. They doubted even the DNA, but law enforcement and Shannon's extended family saw the truth at trial. Prosecutors presented an overwhelming case: physical evidence, digital trails, testimony, and motive. In June 2013, Clay Starbuck was convicted of first-degree murder under aggravating circumstances, including desecration of human remains. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His 2015 appeal was denied. He remains incarcerated in Spokane County, while justice was served in court. The emotional toll lingers. The children lost their mother and, effectively, their father. For Shannon's family, the deepest wound isn't just her absence. It's knowing her life was taken by someone who once claimed to love her. The tragic death of Nadine. From the moment Nadine met Daniel, with his intense gaze and athletic build, she was drawn to him. Despite their different backgrounds, their connection was immediate and electric. They spent their days exploring pristine beaches, diving into turquoise waters, and exchanging dreams and secrets. Nadine was enamored with Daniel's effortless surfing, and he was captivated by her free spirit, sincerity, and infectious laughter. Daniel, a few years older than Nadine, lived with his family in a Dublin suburb, working as a window fitter. For Nadine, the relationship was light-hearted, a carefree romance with no strings attached. But everything changed when she discovered she was pregnant. Daniel attempted to rekindle the relationship and promised a future as a family. But by the time Nadine gave birth to their daughter, Kia, in November 2013, Daniel was absent. Instead, it was Nadine's sister, Phoebe, who stood by her side, comforting her during labor, snapping the first photo of mother and child, and offering unwavering support through early motherhood. Despite the emotional abandonment, Nadine embraced motherhood. She leaned on Phoebe and found strength in her new role. She dreamed of building a home, a life, a future, not just for herself, but for Kia. In 2016, Nadine moved into a new home, hoping Daniel would join them and finally step up as a father. But once again, he failed to follow through. Disappointed and emotionally drained, Nadine ended the relationship for good. She remained hopeful Kia could still have a bond with her father, even if he never earned it. Nadine's mother, Claire, saw Daniel for what he was, a man who prioritized boxing over fatherhood. Still, Nadine shielded Kia from that truth, making excuses for his absence and covering up his neglect to protect her daughter's heart. In October 2019, Claire suggested a birthday trip to Rome. Their Kia, now 6 years old, opened up to her mother about the struggles she faced. Nadine was doing her best as a single mother. She had a stable job, confidence, and hope for the future. She had even received a modeling opportunity and was ready to start a new chapter. But Daniel wasn't done interfering. He continued to make empty promises to visit Kia, then failed to show up. When he offered to give Nadine money for their daughter, she reluctantly agreed to meet, suspecting he just wanted to see her, not Kia. Nadine still clung to the hope of a family, but that illusion was fading. Behind the scenes, Daniel had become possessive and controlling. When Nadine began dating someone new, a man from Turkey, she kept the relationship private, knowing Daniel's temper. Still, he found out. Enraged, he began stalking her, escalating his harassment. On December 5, 2019, Nadine texted Daniel. Their relationship was over. She told him to stop, but the peace didn't last. On December 13th, Nadine asked Daniel to watch Kia while she attended her aunt's birthday at a local pub. He agreed, keeping Kia at his home in Clondalkin while Nadine lived in Wicklow. That night, Daniel repeatedly tried to contact her, calling at 5:57 a.m. and again at 1:26 a.m. She didn't answer. He sent one last message, "Come home soon," when Nadine returned. She changed clothes, then something went terribly wrong. Daniel attacked her violently. Kier, only 6 years old, witnessed the horror unfold. The screams woke a neighbor, Ella Klinovich, who peeked through the door to see Nadine lying on the floor, Daniel looming over her, his face twisted enraged. Ella fled and alerted Nadine's family. By the time Claire arrived, the scene was soaked in blood. The hallway and kitchen bore the signs of a brutal assault: shattered glass, smeared walls, and silence. At 9:50 a.m. Claire, Phoebe, and Nadine's brother Kyle found her body on the floor, mutilated, lifeless. The horror was incomprehensible. Meanwhile, 20 miles away in Larag, Daniel had crashed his car into a ditch. John Becken, a passerby, saw the wreckage and assumed the driver was drunk. But as he approached, Daniel emerged from the fog, disheveled, shaking, and soaked in blood. He confessed, "I did something terrible." Paramedics rushed Nadine to St. Vincent's Hospital, where she was admitted to the ICU with catastrophic injuries. Doctors documented 64 wounds across her body. Her condition was critical. Claire never left her side, bringing family photos, perfumes, and Nadine's favorite belongings in a desperate attempt to bring her back. But Nadine never regained consciousness. On December 17th, between 3 o'clock and 4 p.m., Nadine passed away. Irish police described the killing as one of the most violent domestic assaults they had ever seen. Daniel was arrested and brought to court on December 16th. He remained in custody as the world around Nadine's loved ones shattered. This is not just a story of violence. It is a story of love, of a woman who tried to protect her child, of a mother who refused to give up hope, and of a family who refused to stay silent. Let Nadine's story be remembered, not for the cruelty that ended her life, but for the courage, strength, and love with which she lived it. It was described as one of the most brutal killings authorities had ever encountered. After the murder, Chief State Pathologist Dr. Linda Mogan conducted the autopsy at the city funeral home on December 18th. But even as the official cause of death was confirmed, Nadine's loved ones were left reeling, struggling with heartbreak and unanswered questions. Her mother, Claire, was consumed with anguish, unable to understand how such violence had touched their lives. The next day, her killer Daniel confessed. He described in chilling detail how he had launched a violent attack on Nadine. First, he grabbed her and struck her in the head. Then came a relentless barrage of punches. Nadine fought back with everything she had, but Daniel's strength was overwhelming. He continued his assault, kicking her repeatedly, then stabbing and strangling her with a phone charger cord. Daniel's daughter, Kia, witnessed the savage attack. She begged her father to stop, pleaded with him to spare Nadine's life, but her cries were ignored. Despite her desperate resistance, Nadine stood no chance. On December 22nd, a funeral service was held for Nadine at St. Mary and Peter's Church in her hometown of Arlo. Over 1,000 mourners filled the church, with hundreds more watching via live broadcast. 6 pallbearers carefully carried the coffin. Inside lay Nadine, young and beautiful, resting as if in peaceful sleep. The altar was surrounded by scarlet velvet roses. In the front pew, Claire sat motionless, Her eyes brimmed with tears as she looked upon her daughter's coffin, her expression a mixture of love, sorrow, and disbelief. All around her, family and friends wept openly, clinging to tissues and one another in collective grief. David, Nadine's father, stepped forward, his voice trembling. He placed one of Nadine's elegant handbags beside her, Kafina's small but intimate tribute to her unique sense of style. She had always been able to turn the simplest accessory into something iconic. Kyle, a close family friend, followed with a photograph of Nadine and her daughter Kia. In the image, both were beaming with joy, locked in an embrace. Kia, now confused and heartbroken, clung to her mother's side, struggling to comprehend what had happened. Phoebe, Nadine's sister, brought forward a pair of shoes ones Nadine had planned to wear to her prom. Her hands shook, and tears streamed down her face. Tanith, another dear friend, placed a photo album on the altar. It held snapshots of Nadine's happiest days, carefree smiles, joyful parties, radiant memories frozen in time. Father Michael Moore, the priest, led the ceremony. His words were tender and filled with hope. Looking directly at Kia, he expressed gratitude for the light she had brought into Nadine's life. He promised her that she would always be surrounded by love, that those who loved her mother would protect her like guardian angels. Phoebe and Tanith gave their final tearful farewells to their sister before the service ended. As funeral music played, Nadine's coffin was lowered into the earth at San Gabriel Cemetery. Her loved ones said goodbye, finding small comfort in the belief that her soul was finally at peace. But this story doesn't end here, because what followed is the tale of another woman whose life was built on lies from the very beginning. Her name was Michelle. She grew up in Hurst, a suburban town outside Dallas, Texas. She had a younger sister, Laura. Their mother abandoned them early, leaving the girls to be raised by their father, a man struggling with poverty and alcoholism. His parenting was erratic at best, surviving on construction gigs and alcohol. He often turned to scams for easy money. One such scam involved him deliberately injuring himself at work to collect insurance compensation. It worked until surveillance footage exposed his scheme. He was arrested, leaving Michelle and Laura in a world defined by deceit, manipulation, and instability. For Michelle, lies weren't a strategy. They were survival. She longed to escape the poverty and chaos that surrounded her. But by the time she reached adolescence, deceit was already second nature. At 15, Michelle was a striking brunette with a commanding presence. She quickly learned that her looks could open doors and manipulate the men around her. At 17, she dropped out of school and announced she was pregnant by her 16-year-old boyfriend, Kenneth O'Brien. Wanting to do the right thing, Kenneth joined the military to support his new family. They married and had 2 more children. Life became a cycle of military moves and temporary housing far from Michelle's dream of glamour and wealth. After 5 years, she left Kenneth, claiming abuse and infidelity. Back in Hurst, Michelle portrayed herself as a victim of domestic violence. Friends and family rallied around her. She appeared to rebuild her life, finding work as a dental assistant and reconnecting with an old classmate, Brandon. The two fell in love, and Brandon welcomed Michelle's 3 children as his own. They planned a wedding, but just before the big day, Brandon made a shocking discovery. Michelle had never legally divorced Kenneth. When confronted, she claimed she was too afraid to file due to past abuse. With legal help, the matter was resolved, and the wedding went ahead. In the early years, their life seemed stable. Brandon built an IT business, and Michelle kept working. But the quiet domesticity wasn't enough. Soon, Michelle began bringing home dental tools and supplies, things she had no reason to possess. When cash started piling up in her purse, Brandon grew suspicious. Eventually, she was caught stealing. The scandal nearly led to charges, but she narrowly escaped trial. From there, things only got worse. Neighbors began noticing cars arriving at the house while Brandon was away. Acting on suspicion, he installed hidden audio recorders throughout the home. What he heard confirmed his worst fears. Multiple men had been visiting while he was at work. Michelle Williams, the widow's game. Brandon thought he knew Michelle. After all, they were married. But one day, curiosity led him down a path of personal investigation, and what he uncovered shattered his entire perception of the woman he once loved. Michelle had claimed her first marriage ended due to domestic violence, but Brandon found out the truth was far less sympathetic. The real reason for the divorce: her repeated infidelities. Brandon's patience snapped. He confronted Michelle and filed for divorce, but Michelle didn't take rejection well. While Brandon was at work, she sought revenge. "I had a beautiful saltwater aquarium," Brandon recalled. "Thousands of dollars worth of rare fish. She poured Comet bleach into the tank and killed them all. But it didn't end there. Brandon also had a beloved dog named Domino. Michelle fed him sleeping pills and overdose that proved fatal. She put my dog to sleep," Brandon said. "You can't make that girl go away." It was a nightmare that wouldn't end. Brandon's story, as dark as it was, would prove to be just the beginning of Michelle's trail of destruction. Years earlier, Michelle had been in a relationship with a young man named John Paul Ray. They were both high school students in Hurst, Texas. When Michelle got pregnant, she told another man, Kenneth O'Brien, that he was the father. Kenneth married her, raised the child as his own, and paid child support for years. He didn't learn the truth until much later. The child wasn't his. Eventually, Michelle reconnected with John Paul Ray, the actual father of her first child, and they lived together in a common-law marriage for 8 years. But when John suspected she was cheating, Michelle didn't deny it. She confirmed the affair, and John moved out, leaving most of their shared belongings behind. Michelle moved on to a new man, Greg Williams. Greg was older, wealthy, and respected. A 2-time divorce, and devoted father. He had no idea he was Michelle's next target. Michelle and Greg seemed like a perfect couple. They blended their families, threw birthday parties and barbecues, and welcomed a daughter together in 2007. In 2008, they married. Greg had built everything from the ground up. A martial arts black belt, a sports enthusiast, and a successful businessman. He believed in hard work and family values. But behind the picturesque suburban life, the couple harbored secrets. They'd met on an adult bondage and BDSM site. Their house parties were wild enough to prompt neighbor complaints. Quietly, they decided to move. They were about to buy a new home worth $4.5 million. On the night of October 12, 2011, Michelle and Greg couldn't sleep. They stayed up, discussing the big move. Greg eventually went to bed. Michelle comforted their crying daughter and dozed off beside her. By 4:40 a.m. on October 13th, a chilling 911 call came in. A hysterical woman claimed she and her husband had been attacked during a home invasion. She was injured. Her husband had been shot. Police raced to the scene. Inside the house, they found the television blaring and the couple's young daughter, sound asleep on the couch, completely undisturbed. Michelle, however, appeared too composed, fully dressed, hairstyled, makeup fresh. Her story didn't match the scene. She claimed a masked intruder had struck her with a wrench, knocking her down. She said she heard a gunshot and that the man fled through the back door. But the house told a different story. Greg was found dead in bed, shot in the head with a .45 caliber handgun. The weapon was found near the back door, alongside a wrench. Neither showed fingerprints. No valuables had been stolen. No sign of forced entry. And surveillance footage from a nearby home showed no unfamiliar vehicles entering the gated community, only a newspaper delivery car. Michelle's behavior and story immediately raised red flags. Detectives brought her in for questioning. Hours in, Her version of events began to unravel. She eventually admitted she had wiped down the gun and cleaned Greg's hands. Why? She said she wanted to shield their daughter from knowing her father had taken his own life. She claimed to have staged a robbery using bleach to wipe down the scene and had even hit herself with the wrench. But none of it made sense. Why was she dressed, made up, and acting so calm? Why was the scene so precisely manipulated? And why had she already begun accessing Greg's assets? Michelle was arrested for perjury, but was released shortly after. That evening, she went to her sister Laura's home. She didn't say a single word about Greg. The next morning, Michelle was in high spirits. Again, fully styled and made up. She went out to breakfast for pancakes while the police still searched for answers. Eventually, Michelle gave investigators both the motive and the evidence. She began liquidating Greg's assets, cashing unknown amounts of checks from his IT company. She sold their frozen yogurt shop. But her biggest misstep came when she tried to claim Greg's life insurance policy valued at $600,000. Michelle was the sole beneficiary. The policy had been taken out just 2 months before his death. But Michelle overlooked one crucial detail. The insurance company ruled Greg's death was not covered. If his death was ruled a suicide, she would receive nothing. And that's exactly what happened. Shay was denied the payout. That denial pointed to Michelle's motive. She needed the insurance money, and when Greg stood in her way, she eliminated the obstacle. Michelle Williams had spun a web of lies, manipulating everyone in her path: ex-husbands, children, friends, and even the police. But in the end, her greed, her ego, and her inability to remain hidden in plain sight brought it all crashing down. And Greg, he never saw it coming. Later, another crucial detail emerged, one that cast an even darker shadow over Michelle Williams. A financial fraud was uncovered, suggesting she had been orchestrating a deception long before her husband's death. Investigators discovered that fraudulent financial documents had been used to secure a mortgage on the home Greg and Michelle had planned to move into. The account numbers had been intentionally altered, a detail that initially slipped past the mortgage lender. Shortly after Greg's death, Michelle abruptly canceled a scheduled meeting with the mortgage company. It wasn't until the police began digging deeper into the couple's finances that the fake loan documents came to light. Michelle, confident in her impunity, wrote a check for $118,000 to attorney Kenneth Wincorn. Then, she left town for a week-long vacation in Grapevine with her children, just days after her husband's death. As police unraveled the case over the next 3 months, the pieces of Michelle's web of deceit began to come together. Greg's autopsy revealed he had been shot at close range between 12 and 18 inches away. Toxicology tests showed a large dose of sleeping pills in his system at the time of death. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle. According to authorities, Michelle had sedated her husband, turned up the television volume, and shot him while he slept. Their daughter, asleep in the next room, heard nothing. On November 30th, 2011, the Tarrant County Medical Examiner officially ruled Greg Williams' death a homicide. Michelle Williams was arrested on January 9th, 2012, while en route to a fitness center. She was charged with murder, tampering with evidence, and making false statements to police. Her bail was initially set at $522,000, but was later reduced to $85,000. Dressed in gym clothes, she was released from jail wearing a GPS ankle monitor, walked out with none other than attorney Kenneth Wincorn by her side. That detail didn't sit well with Greg's first wife, Kathy. Wincorn had previously been involved in legal matters surrounding her and Greg's divorce, including the custody arrangements for their daughter Taylor. Kathy was outraged that money from Greg's estate was now paying for the legal defense of the woman accused of killing him. But Wincorn clarified that, although his firm had handled the divorce, he had never personally represented Greg. He claimed he only learned of Greg's death from an IT employee and that Michelle later sought him out for legal counsel, as Michelle's plot to profit from Greg's death unraveled. She changed her name to Shelley and attempted to reinvent herself as a fitness guru. She began a public relationship with Gene Wallace, a man 15 years her junior and a friend of her eldest son. Together, they opened a fitness club in Bedford, Texas, and heavily promoted it on social media. Despite her legal troubles, Michelle appeared to be enjoying life. She attended court hearings in flashy outfits, short skirts, knee-high boots, and low-cut blouses. She never showed any outward signs of mourning. She never grieved Greg's death for even a second. Greg's ex-wife Kathy later said. Rob Conver, a longtime friend of Greg, also attended many of the hearings. He witnessed firsthand how Michelle manipulated those around her, especially law enforcement, portraying herself as a vulnerable woman in need of protection. On October 9, 2013, Michelle accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to tampering with evidence and deadly third-degree felony in Texas and was sentenced to 18 years in prison. In a jailhouse interview following the plea, Michelle said, "Things can go differently. Play big, win, big or lose big. I expect to do a couple of years and then be out on parole." But in February 2014, everything changed. Michelle suddenly recanted her confession during an interview. She now claimed she was not guilty. The judge immediately revoked the plea agreement and set a date for a full jury trial. In the courtroom, prosecutors laid out their case. They alleged Michelle had planned the murder meticulously to collect on Greg's life insurance policy. Assistant District Attorney Jack Strickland called the crime a time-tested motive: money and greed. Although Michelle had previously admitted to cleaning the gun and Greg's body, her defense team used the lack of DNA at the scene to cast doubt. Her attorney, Kenneth Wincorn, argued that it was normal for her fingerprints to be on cleaning supplies in the home. After all, she lived there. He claimed that without concrete evidence of premeditation, a murder conviction would not hold. If the jury concluded that Michelle staged the scene to make it appear Greg had died, Netrian then cleaned the area, and lied to police, she could face life in prison. Throughout the trial, testimony painted a picture of a deeply dysfunctional marriage. Digital evidence from texts and messages revealed frequent arguments, many of them centered around money. On the night Greg died, prosecutors said the couple had a heated dispute over a house deposit, and that Greg had even slapped Michelle during the confrontation. The defense countered with a different narrative. Greg, they said, had taken his own life. He had suffered from depression and had been grieving the recent deaths of both his grandmother and best friend, the latter having died by suicide. They claimed Michelle panicked when she found her husband's body and attempted to shield their 4-year-old daughter from the trauma in court. Michelle maintained her polished image, her hair always styled, her nails done. During graphic testimony and photo evidence of Greg's body, she wiped away a tear but showed little emotion otherwise. Perhaps most damning of all was the testimony of her own adult son, Andrew O'Brien. He revealed that Michelle had asked him to help frame Greg's ex-wife Kathy by making it look like she had a motive to kill Greg over unresolved custody issues. But there had never been any custody disputes. Andrew told the court he was stunned by his mother's request and believed she was experiencing a mental breakdown. In the end, the jury found Michelle Williams guilty not of murder, but of felony tampering with evidence. During the trial, she falsely claimed to be pregnant with twins in what appeared to be a ploy to delay her sentencing. But the claim was later debunked. Michelle Williams now sits in prison, her past unraveled, her lies exposed, and her future longer in her hands. Michelle's courtroom performance, her feigned charm, and emotional appeals did little to sway the outcome of her trial. She tried to portray herself as a fragile, impulsive woman rather than a calculated killer, but the jury wasn't convinced. Ultimately, Michelle Williams chose the narrative of a distressed wife, pushed to her limits. "He did it," she murmured, arms wrapped around her head. In a chilling moment, she even congratulated the detective for cracking the case. "I wouldn't have made it through the day," she said. "You've won." Before investigators even openly questioned her version of events, few truly believed that Greg Williams had simply lost his life. He had too much to live for and too much awareness of how deeply loss cuts. Kathy Williams believed Michelle's secret relationship with Gene Wallace may have been the motive. If Greg found out she was sleeping with her little boyfriend, he would have left her and she would have gotten nothing, she said. He was willing to put up with a lot, but cheating, never. Michelle left behind a trail of devastation. "She's ruined so many lives, you can't even imagine," said Brandon. "She's a professional manipulator. If the courts had dug deeper, if they'd interviewed all of us, maybe things would have turned out differently." Michelle Williams was sentenced to 60 years in prison, with a minimum of 30 years to serve before becoming eligible for parole. She is currently incarcerated at Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, Texas, a convicted fraudster and felon. Michelle has shown no genuine remorse and continues to deflect responsibility for her actions. August 12, 2019, began as an ordinary summer day in the UK. Lindsay Burbeck, a beloved teaching assistant, was on holiday and looking forward to spending time with her family. She and her daughter, Sarah, spent the afternoon shopping in Blackburn. They made plans to have tea later that evening, where Sarah would introduce her boyfriend to her mom. But Lindsay never made it to that tea. After saying goodbye, Lindsay went home to change and left for her usual walk through the woods around 4 p.m. She never returned. This case unfolded in Blackburn, Lancashire, a town in northwest England known for its scenic greenery and vast wooded areas. Lindsay lived in the village of Huncote, on the outskirts of Accrington. A mother of two, Lindsay had recently separated from her husband, Tim Burbeck, but the two remained on good terms. She was a talented artist and worked at a primary school in Burnley, where she was adored by staff and students alike. When Sarah and her boyfriend arrived at Lindsay's home that evening, there was no answer at the door. Sarah, knowing her mother never missed plans, grew concerned. She called Lindsay several times, no answer. She texted, "Where are you?" We sat outside for an hour and called 6 times, and followed up with another message filled with question marks. Still, nothing. Eventually, Sarah called her father. Near midnight, Tim took Sarah and her boyfriend to his house, and later returned with a spare key to check Lindsay's home. Everything inside appeared normal. No signs of struggle? No. Note. No clue. At 12:11 a.m. on August 13th, Tim Burbeck reported Lindsay missing to Lancashire police. "My ex-wife seems to be missing. We can't find her. It doesn't look like her," he told the dispatcher. The community was rocked by the news. Volunteers, strangers, neighbors, teenagers on bikes, parents with strollers poured into the area, determined to find Lindsay. They distributed flyers, shared social media posts, and organized search parties around the wooded area of Coppice, near where Lindsay was last seen. Despite their efforts, days passed with no sign of her. Drones, helicopters, search and rescue teams, and even cadaver dogs combed the surrounding countryside. CCTV footage released by police showed Lindsay walking toward the woods along Burnley Road at 4:10 p.m. She wore a purple jacket, black leggings, and dark sneakers with white soles. By August 19th, a week since she vanished, hope was wearing thin. Still, there was no evidence that Lindsay had been harmed. The community clung to the possibility she might still be found alive. Then, everything changed. On August 24th, 12 days after Lindsay's disappearance, a local man walking his dog through Accrington Cemetery noticed his pet sniffing and digging frantically in the underbrush. The dog wouldn't respond to his calls. As the man approached, he detected a foul smell. Swarming flies, a plastic bag, and what looked like a human foot were visible beneath the brush. Lindsay's body had been found. She had been buried in a shallow grave, wrapped in 2 plastic sheets, partially covered in soil and grass. She was naked. Dr. Naomi Carter, The pathologist who conducted the autopsy concluded Lindsay had died from a fractured neck. The trauma was so severe that it crushed her larynx, likely the result of a violent blow from a foot or knee. There were also signs that someone had attempted to saw off her right leg after death. Tool marks and a deep gash down to the bone confirmed the grotesque attempt. Due to decomposition, it was impossible to determine if there had been sexual assault. Shockingly, the area where Lindsay's body was discovered had already been searched several times by police and volunteers. Some even recalled noticing a blue wheelie bin left near the scene days earlier, a ominous clue that would later become central to the investigation. A murder inquiry was officially launched, and Lindsay Burbeck's tragic disappearance had turned into a homicide investigation. The murder of Lindsay Burbeck's. The investigation into Lindsay Burbeck's disappearance unfolded. A series of seemingly unrelated observations slowly began forming a chilling picture. Volunteers combing the cemetery on the evening of August 20th at around 9 p.m. noticed a dark stain on the outside of a blue industrial dumpster tucked behind some bushes. They photographed it, suspecting it might be blood, and notified the police. Two responding officers arrived on scene, examined the dumpster, and concluded the dark brown mark was likely just dirt. The container appeared relatively new, and with no immediate evidence linking it to Lindsay's disappearance, it was left undisturbed. Other clues discovered around the cemetery weren't taken seriously at first either. Christine Alderson, a local woman walking her dogs with her daughter, on August 18th, found a blood-stained cloth in the grass. The blood appeared fresh and red. She assumed it may have belonged to a homeless person who frequented the area. Around the same time, another dog walker, Judith Bibby, noticed red clothing tangled on barbed wire near the Cargill Hill Trail. It was later believed to be Lindsay's jacket. Judith also recalled hearing what she thought was a child's voice, though she didn't hear any signs of distress. No screaming, no struggle. On August 25th, detectives revisited the cemetery. This time, they found what would become crucial evidence: a yellow-handled saw and a pair of green, heavy-duty gloves discarded near Lindsay's shallow grave. Both were smeared with blood. Forensic testing revealed Lindsay's DNA on the exterior of the gloves and on the inside, the DNA of her killer. Investigators also discovered a pair of Lindsay's Skechers sneakers, cut along the sole and stuffed inside a blue plastic bag that had been dumped in the area. Her body, wrapped in plastic sheeting, was found lying atop grass and foliage not native to the cemetery grounds. That led detectives to one critical conclusion: Lindsay had been murdered elsewhere, and her body transported to the burial site. One detail, previously brushed off, suddenly demanded renewed attention: the blue garbage can spotted by multiple volunteers. Authorities turned to surveillance footage from the Burley Road area. What they saw was both alarming and illuminating. CCTV captured a young male pulling a blue wheelie bin along the street over several days. Even more unsettling, the same figure returned to the cemetery 4 times. The video aired on national news, accompanied by a public plea for help identifying the individual. And it worked. Viewers who recognized him, teachers, parents, community members, were shocked. The boy came forward and surrendered to police the same day, due to his age. His name was initially withheld, but the boy seen in the footage was 16-year-old Rocky Marciano Price, a local teen from Winnie Hill Road in Accrington. His family had lived there for 3 decades. Rocky Price was no typical teenager. Diagnosed with autism, ADHD, and hyperactivity. From an early age, he also had a notably low IQ. He attended a special education school in Barnoldswick part-time, and was described as extremely quiet, often nonverbal, and unable to grasp basic emotional concepts. He preferred routine, physical tasks, and isolation. A psychologist's 2015 assessment concluded Price struggled to understand both his emotions and the emotions of others. He had difficulty connecting actions with consequences. A 2016 report confirmed his need for constant supervision. His teachers noted he was physically strong for his age and hard to engage in any academic pursuits. He loved the gym, cared for chickens on the family's small holding, and spent hours gaming or watching films. He lived in a world of his own, detached, often unaware of the reality around him. But what led him to commit such a horrifying act? According to the prosecution, there was no personal connection between Price and Lindsay Burbeck. She was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Rocky Price was hunting for a woman to kill any woman. His target was random, his actions premeditated. On August 12, 2020, exactly 1 year after Lindsay's murder, Price finally went to trial. The first jury failed to reach a unanimous verdict. A retrial followed, lasting 8 days. After just 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty. Price, now 17, appeared via video link from HMP Weatherby. He showed no emotion as the verdict was read. His parents, present in court, remained equally expressionless. Price had earlier admitted to helping dispose of Lindsay's body, but denied killing her. In a prepared statement, he claimed a strange man approached him and offered money in exchange for help burying a body. According to this version of events, Price merely moved the body. He didn't cause her death, but the evidence told another story. Police searched his family home and found the exact same type of blue plastic bags used to wrap Lindsay's remains. Clothing matching the outfit seen on CCTV was recovered, along with a tracksuit. Surveillance showed him walking with a rucksack near cops with the likely murder scene on the evening of August 12th. He made 2 trips there that night. Around 6:55 p.m., he was captured on CCTV with what investigators believe was a saw in his rucksack. Later, at 8:28 p.m., a man walking his dog saw Price pulling the same blue garbage can near where Lindsay's body would later be discovered. He showed no panic, no fear, only cold, calculated steps to dispose of a human being like refuse. The court heard from another woman, Zoe Braithwaite, who encountered a hooded teen acting suspiciously just minutes before Lindsay's disappearance. She felt uneasy, picked up her pace, and fled. The Aryan instinct that may have saved her life. If it hadn't been Lindsay, it likely would have been someone else. After sentencing, the judge addressed the gravity of the crime. Price, he said, attacked with the clear intent to kill. He had stalked a previous potential victim, failed to act, then waited for another opportunity. That woman was Lindsay. Price's actions after the murder showed disturbing levels of reasoning and planning, traits inconsistent with someone unaware of his choices. The gloves, the saw, the burial, the return visits all pointed to forethought, not confusion. On sentencing, Rocky Marciano Price was given life in prison, with a minimum term of 16 years. He will only be released if the parole board believes he no longer poses a threat to the public. The case struck a nerve nationwide, not only because of the brutal nature of Lindsay's murder, but because it was entirely senseless. Mother of 2, killed at random, by a stranger with no known motive. And for months, his identity was hidden until, just 24 hours after the conviction, a judge lifted the publication ban. For the first time, the public saw the face of Rocky Marciano Price, the teenage killer who chose a random woman to satisfy an inexplicable urge to kill. Although the court discussed restrictions surrounding Rocky Price, certain details couldn't be fully disclosed due to his young age. However, after the jury unanimously found Price guilty, the judge lifted those restrictions. In the judge's words, the defendant's mental illness could not excuse, nor even explain, his actions. It was clear to everyone that Rocky knew killing was wrong, and yet, he did it anyway. Crimes like this are rare, but when they happen, they shake public trust and heighten collective fear. And yet, a question still haunts this case. Why? Why would a teenage boy kill a stranger in such a brutal manner? What was the motive? Only Rocky Price knows the truth, and he never shared it. If it hadn't been Lindsay Burbeck, Many believe it could have been someone else. Lindsay's funeral was held on September 20th at St. Margaret's Church in Hap. Over 200 mourners attended the service. Police had to temporarily stop traffic on Manchester Road as her flower-covered coffin was carried into the church. Friends, family, and even strangers moved by her story left dozens of floral tributes at the scene where her body had been found. Lindsay's daughter, Sarah, described her mother as a woman full of life, optimistic and forward-looking. She had been planning a trip to Glasgow with her friend Sharon and was hoping to find love on Match.com. Lindsay Burbeck was building a future, one full of dreams and new beginnings. But that bright future was cut short on a quiet summer day by a senseless act of violence. Her family and the detectives who fought tirelessly to bring her killer to justice welcomed the jury's decision. Yet they all agreed no court verdict could bring Lindsay back. No sentence could mend the grief etched into the hearts of those who loved her. Outside the courthouse, the mood was divided. Members of Price's family wore shirts reading wrongfully, "Convicted, set this boy free." On the back, it read, "The killer is still at large." Some speculated Price may have been a budding psychopath. Someone curious to know what it felt like to kill to watch someone die and then desecrate their body. While autism was mentioned during his trial, it's important to clarify, autism is a complex neurodevelopmental disorder marked by differences in social interaction, behavior, and communication, not violence. The word autism literally translates to a person within themselves. It remains an area of active research, with genetics playing a likely role, but it cannot explain away such brutality. In this case, many believe the punishment matched the horror of the crime. Jessica Hiringa, a vanishing in plain sight in 2013. 25-year-old Jessica Hiringa vanished under disturbing circumstances while working alone at a gas station in Norton Shores, Michigan. What followed was a years-long investigation that would eventually uncover chilling truths. Jessica was born on July 16, 1987. She lived in Norton Shores with her partner, Dakota Quaildye, and their young son, Zen. A loving mother, Jessica was known for her friendly, warm nature. To support her family, she often worked extra hours at the Exxon gas station near Lake Michigan. Her dream was to study accounting, but financial struggles kept her from pursuing college. Jessica and Dakota had a rocky relationship marked by frequent arguments. They were engaged, but repeatedly postponed their wedding due to financial and personal complications. On April 26, 2013, Jessica's day started like any other. After a short trip to a nearby store, around 3 p.m., she drove to work and clocked in at the gas station around 4:35 p.m. She was scheduled to work until 11:30 p.m. Alone. At 11:14 p.m., a customer called 911 with a troubling report. He had stopped to pay for gas but found the station empty and unattended. The lights were on, the door was unlocked, and both his and another vehicle were parked outside. "It looks very odd," he told the dispatcher. Police arrived within 10 minutes. There were no signs of a struggle inside the station. Everything was in place. Jessica's purse, with $400 in cash, was found in the back room, alongside her coat and keys. Her car was still parked outside. The register was untouched, and the last recorded transaction had been at 10:52 p.m. for a lighter. One detail stood out, a single drop of blood, later confirmed to be Jessica's, near the back storage room. Also on the floor, a cap from a Walt P22 pistols, laser sight, and 2 small batteries. Jessica's pack of cigarettes lay by the register, as if she'd stepped away for just a moment. The station had no interior surveillance cameras, a critical gap in the investigation. Jessica had vanished. Police contacted the station owner, who in turn asked a nearby manager to secure the site. Jessica's family was notified, and they immediately began calling friends, hoping for any clue. One friend recalled stopping by the station between 8 o'clock and 9 p.m. and said everything seemed normal. Later that night, another employee arrived with her boyfriend to lock up the station. They noticed a silver Chrysler Town and Country minivan parked near the rear service door. Its back hatch was open. A young man with messy, wavy hair wearing an orange sweatshirt was seen repeatedly opening and closing the van's rear door. Then he drove off. Police canvassed the area and located surveillance footage from a nearby business. At 11:02 p.m., it captured a silver Chrysler minivan passing by the Exxon station. Another witness, a store employee, reported seeing a man talking with Jessica that night. He believed the man was simply flirting with her. The man asked Jessica why she wasn't inside the store. Jessica stood just outside the door, using descriptions from that witness and the employee who saw the minivan. Police created a composite sketch of the unknown man. The composite sketch, released 3 days after Jessica Heringa's disappearance, described the suspect as a light-skinned young male with dark wavy hair, a stocky build, and standing approximately 1.82 meters tall. Although police received numerous tips following the release, none led to any significant breakthroughs. Complicating the investigation was the identification of a silver Chrysler minivan, an extremely common vehicle. In Michigan alone, approximately 15,000 of that specific model were registered, making it nearly impossible to narrow down suspects based solely on the vehicle's description. Initially, Jessica's boyfriend, Dakota Quayle D., was a person of interest. He admitted to frequent arguments with Jessica, but adamantly denied ever hurting her. Dakota fully cooperated with the investigation, stating he was home with their 3-year-old son the night Jessica vanished. Lacking access to a car, and with phone records verifying his location that evening, Dakota was cleared of any suspicion. Investigators soon uncovered that Jessica, known for her friendly and outgoing nature, had drawn the attention of several admirers, some of whom had misinterpreted her kindness. One such admirer was Jess Ammerman, a 37-year-old married plumber. Around 9:30 p.m., on the night Jessica vanished, he stopped by the gas station, professed his love, and even stated he was willing to leave his wife for her. Jessica declined his advances, after which Ammerman left and called his wife. Their phone call lasted nearly 50 minutes. Following a polygraph test and a corroborating statement from his wife, Ammerman was eliminated as a suspect. Another name, Surface Rob Fallett, the brother of the Exxon station manager. Rob claimed to have visited the station around 9 p.m. that night. He said Jessica appeared upset and confided that she was dealing with family issues. Rob offered her a place to stay, but she declined. After making a purchase, he reportedly left for a night fishing trip. Phone records later confirmed his account, and he, too, was cleared. Search and rescue operations were launched on a massive scale, utilizing helicopters, trained canines, and ground teams that combed through residential areas, commercial zones, nearby woods, and the shores of Lake Michigan. Despite these exhaustive efforts, no trace of Jessica was found, and the case stalled. Then, in February 2014, nearly a year later, chillingly similar crime occurred. A young blonde woman wearing glasses was abducted while walking home late at night. Her attacker dragged her to his apartment and assaulted her. Despite being threatened with death, she was released hours later. Police identified her assailant as 42-year-old Brad Allen Mason. When officers moved to arrest Mason, he pulled a fake firearm, prompting officers to shoot him fatally. His criminal history included a 2004 kidnapping conviction and a 2011 arrest for indecent exposure. At the time of Jessica's disappearance, Mason had been living in a dormitory located just across the street from the gas station. Still, investigators found no direct evidence linking him to Jessica's case. 2 years after Jessica's disappearance, in 2016, another terrifying encounter unfolded. A young woman, disoriented after leaving a party, was approached by a man in a silver minivan who offered her a ride. She declined, but asked to borrow his phone. He agreed, but only if she got inside the vehicle. Once she did, He locked the doors, revealed that the phone was dead, and pulled a gun, ordering her to stay silent as he drove. The woman, feeling sick, asked him to lower the window. Seizing the moment, she leaped through the open window of the moving vehicle and fled to a nearby house. The man sped away, but she immediately called the police. Thanks to her detailed description and surveillance footage, police tracked the license plate of the silver Chrysler Town & Country. The vehicle was registered to 46-year-old Jeffrey Willis. Willis, a factory worker with no prior convictions, lived a quiet, isolated life. But when authorities searched his van, they found a Walther P22 semi-automatic pistol. The weapon had been reported stolen by one of Willis's colleagues. That discovery prompted a full search of his residence. Inside, investigators uncovered a hidden box filled with BDSM gear, handcuffs, gags, ropes, a vibrator, sedatives, Viagra, gloves, and a bullet that matched the Walther P22. The box also contained anatomical diagrams marked with injection sites and insulin syringes with an unidentified substance. On his computer were disturbing videos depicting kidnapping scenes involving young women. Hidden in a ventilation duct, officers found a hard drive filled with voyeuristic footage Willis had secretly filmed of female neighbors swimming. But most disturbing of all, a folder labeled VICs, short for victims, contained two subfolders, one for Jessica Haringa and another for a woman named Rebecca Blech. Rebecca Blech, 36, had been murdered on June 29, 2014, just a year after Jessica disappeared. She had gone for an evening jog but never made it home. Neighbors found her body on the roadside, initially believing she had been hit by a car. Though unconscious at the time, she died before emergency services arrived. An autopsy revealed she'd been shot 3 times, in the back and head, and had bruises on her wrists and legs, indicating a struggle. No suspect was identified at the time, but after Jeffrey Willis's arrest, forensic evidence linked him to Rebecca's murder. Her DNA was found on a glove recovered from his property. Prosecutors argued that Willis had tried to abduct Rebecca, but when she resisted, he shot her and fled. Despite his continued denial, he was convicted of Rebecca Blech's murder and sentenced to life in prison. While serving time, Willis was charged with the abduction and presumed murder of Jessica Haringa. Though Jessica's body has never been found, the evidence, digital, forensic, and circumstantial, painted a chilling picture of a predator hiding in plain sight. Part 1. Jessica Haringa, a night that never owned. iPhone records revealed a chilling sequence of events on the night Jessica Haringa vanished. Her suspected abductor, Jeffrey Willis, was confirmed to be at the Exxon gas station, the very last place she was seen alive. Shortly after, he traveled to his deceased grandfather's house, just a 13-minute drive from the station. When investigators arrived at that residence, they encountered a heavily fortified front door. Forced entry led them to a disturbing discovery in the basement: an array of cleaning products, powders, and industrial bleaches. Their manufacturing dates: early 2013, the same time Jessica disappeared. Colleagues later recalled that Willis was notably absent from work on April 27, 2013, the day after Jessica went missing. When he returned days later, deep scratches marred his face and hands. The unexplained injuries raised immediate red flags. One woman who visited the Exxon station on April 25th, the night before the disappearance, later came forward. She'd felt uneasy being there so late and expressed her concerns directly to Jessica. Jessica, in return, nodded with anxious eyes. At that moment, a man standing nearby reassured her. "Don't worry, she has customers who look after her." That man would later be identified as Jeffrey Willis. The woman, still unnerved, waited in her car until Jessica closed up and went home. Jessica never made it back the following night. Years later, in 2016, the woman positively identified Jeffrey Willis as the man she had seen at the gas station. Police also uncovered that Willis had frequented the station at least 15 times prior, often interacting with Jessica. Meanwhile, his cousin 48 prison guard Kevin Bloom was taken into custody. During questioning, Kevin's story changed multiple times before he finally broke. He confessed to helping Jeffrey conceal Jessica's body, and to knowledge of the death of another woman, Rebecca Bletch. Information never released to the public. Kevin detailed how, on April 27th, Jeffrey invited him to a party at his late grandfather's house. But when Kevin arrived, it wasn't a celebration he walked into. He saw Jessica Herringer, bound and lifeless on the floor. The cousins then wrapped her in a sheet, placed her in a car, and transported her to a wooded area. There, Jeffrey had already dug a grave. They buried her together and returned as if nothing happened. Kevin later led police to the forest, but despite searching for hours, he couldn't pinpoint the exact burial site. During Jeffrey Willis's trial, prosecutors didn't need a recovered body to build a case. They laid out a timeline supported by surveillance data, digital forensics, and witness testimony. According to the prosecution, Willis had stalked Jessica for weeks. On April 26, 2013, he parked near the service entrance of the station, entered the building, and struck Jessica with a pistol. The laser sight's cover broke off during the attack, and her blood was left behind. He then dragged Jessica out the side door and forced her into his vehicle. From there, he took her to his grandfather's house, where the nightmare continued. A forensic search of Willis's computer revealed files containing photos, articles, and updates on the Jessica Herringer investigation. His password, Jessica's initials JH, and the date, April 27, 2013, the day she presumably died. Willis denied any involvement, claiming he was at home that night. His defense argued there was no DNA or direct evidence linking him to her murder. They suggested her disappearance may have been related to drug trafficking, an idea rooted in unverified claims from Jessica's partner, Dakota Still. The jury found him guilty. Jeffrey Willis was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole. He showed no remorse. His cousin, Kevin Bloom, was convicted for helping dispose of Jessica's body and received 2 years in prison and 5 years probation. Years later, Willis became a suspect in an older, unsolved case. On October 17, 1996, Angela Thorberger, young woman from Fruitport, Michigan, was found dead. That year, Willis, who graduated from her high school in 1988, worked there as a janitor. The school principal became suspicious of the time Willis spent in the computer lab and ordered a review of his activities. While the findings were never released, Willis was quietly asked to resign. Angela's murder remains unsolved, but the suspicion surrounding Jeffrey Willis continues to grow. A decade after Jessica's disappearance, her body has never been recovered. In the years since, her family has fought for custody of her son. Ultimately, Jessica's biological family was awarded guardianship. They've also pushed for legislative change. Thanks to their efforts, a law was passed requiring all gas stations open at night to install security cameras to help ensure that no family has to endure the same unanswered questions. Part 2. The Hawkinsmith Pawnshop Massacre. 911 Operator. 911, where's your emergency? Caller, someone is robbing the pawn shop. My parents got shot. In 2013, in Danville, Kentucky. A call came in that would mark one of the most devastating crimes the community had ever witnessed. 9-year-old Andrew Hawkinsmith was on the phone, frantic, reporting a robbery at his family's business, ABC Gold, Games, and more. His parents had just been shot, and he was hiding with his baby sister. 14-month-old Naomi. Police arrived just 6 minutes later. Inside, they were met with a gruesome scene, bloody trail that led to 35-year-old Michael Hawkinsmith. Moments later, they found his wife Angie, 38, and longtime broker Dan Smith, 60. All three had been executed. each suffering multiple gunshot wounds to the head and torso. Despite the chaos, young Andrew and baby Naomi were miraculously found alive, hiding in a closet. Investigators quickly ruled out robbery as a motive. 14 spent .22 caliber shell casings littered the floor, along with a briefcase belonging to Dan Smith. Nothing was stolen. The cash register was untouched. The victim's personal belongings were left behind. There were no security cameras in the store, no footage, no fingerprints, and no eyewitnesses who could identify the killer. The brutal crime stunned the community. Michael, a former priest, was deeply respected. His wife Angie was known for her kindness. Together, they built a life rooted in faith, love, and hard work. Their pawn shop was a trusted business, and Dan Smith was more than a customer. He was a friend. As the investigation unfolded, witnesses slowly began to emerge, painting a picture of what may have really happened that day. But the identity of the gunman and the motive behind the slaughter remained elusive for years. For Andrew and Naomi, the tragedy left an unfillable void. Two innocent children, one not yet old enough to speak, were left orphaned by an act of pure evil. To this day, the Hawkins-Smith pawnshop murders serve as a haunting reminder. Even in small towns where everyone knows your name, monsters can still walk through the front door. A major obstacle in the investigation was the lack of immediate physical evidence. With few leads to follow, police were left with no choice but to seek out potential eyewitnesses. One such witness came forward, an employee at the nearby Rainbow Cleaners, who recalled seeing a silver minivan parked near the pawn shop that morning. The vehicle was driven by a large man with a thick beard. While one team of officers canvassed the surrounding area, another group was tasked with the heartbreaking job of informing the victims' families. Michael's parents struggled to process the devastating news. The idea that someone in their right mind could wish harm upon their son and daughter-in-law was unthinkable. Still, they found a sliver of solace in knowing that their grandchildren had survived. Had it not been for young Andrew, perhaps neither child would have made it. Soon, word of the tragedy reached the daughter of the third victim, Dan Smith. Dan was a seasoned precious metals buyer who had a reputation for building strong relationships with people from all walks of life. His work often involved handling large sums of cash, sometimes in the hundreds of thousands. That fact led investigators to consider whether Dan Smith, rather than the Hawkins-Smith family, may have been the intended target. Tracking Dan's movements revealed that before arriving at the ABC Gold, Games and More pawn shop, he had visited Lawson's jewelry store in Harrodsburg, about 10 miles northeast of Danville. At the jewelry store, investigators found a security camera mounted on the far wall, capturing footage of everyone entering and exiting the premises. They hoped it might shed light on whether Dan had been followed. The footage showed Dan Smith entering the store at 8:16 a.m. He was alone, carrying the same briefcase that would later be found at the pawn shop. After exchanging greetings with the clerk, he walked toward the back of the store. Sometime later, he reappeared, briefly interacting with an elderly woman who had just walked in and then exited the shop. Nothing seemed unusual. The external surveillance showed no suspicious activity. The police could only watch helplessly, knowing that the man on the screen would soon become a victim of an unspeakable crime. Meanwhile, 9-year-old Andrew Hawkins-Smith was brought to the police station to give his account. He explained that he had been at the pawn shop with his parents when Dan Smith arrived, carrying a bag of money. While Dan and Andrew's father were speaking, a stranger entered and immediately demanded the bag. According to Andrew, Dan Smith complied and handed over the briefcase, but the man shot him anyway. "My father asked him to stop," Andrew recalled, "but he shot him too, with a pistol that looked like the one I play with." Following her instincts, Andrew's mother told him to take his little sister, Naomi, and hide. He did as he was told, finding refuge in a backroom closet. Andrew described the attacker as a very tall man with a blonde beard that looked fake, a description that matched the one provided by the Rainbow Cleaners employee. Investigators continued their work by examining the pawnshop's ownership. While Michael and Angela Hawkins Smith were owners, the business had a third partner, Steve Devine. Though Steve often met Dan Smith for Friday deals, he had been absent that fateful morning. That discrepancy prompted police to verify his whereabouts. Devine explained that he had suffered an allergic reaction and had to cancel all appointments that day, a claim corroborated by his wife. Furthermore, he did not own a silver minivan, with no direct link to the crime. He was ruled out as a suspect. Devine also clarified why there was no surveillance system in place at the pawn shop. He said the previous owner, Kenneth Allen Keith, had removed the security equipment, and the new owners had yet to replace it. Keith, a 48-year-old former pastor and close friend of Michael Hawkins Smith, had sold the shop after being diagnosed with brain cancer. Though no longer in business with them, he still owned a similar shop, Gold Rush Buyers, in neighboring Pulaski County. Michael's family shared that he prayed nightly for Keith's recovery. Their bond stretched back 15 years, beginning when they worked together at a youth church camp. To Andrew, Keith was like an uncle, with few concrete leads. Investigators began checking for any street surveillance cameras near the pawn shop. They found one on the office building of Danville Rentals. The footage captured a silver minivan driving past at 8:45 a.m., though the image was too blurry to make out a license plate. The vehicle's boxy rear and square bumper fit the earlier witness description. Continuing their search outward, another camera at Ephraim McDowell Hospital caught the same van at 8:17 a.m. Investigators finally identified the vehicle as a silver Dodge minivan. In the days following the murders, candlelight vigils were held for Michael, Angela, and Dan. Hundreds gathered to mourn their loss. Both families were devastated. Dan Smith's relatives expressed sorrow, but also a quiet strength, refusing to let bitterness consume them. On September 24th, a new lead emerged. Police received a call from Pastor Tracy Harold in Warren, Michigan, who said he was a longtime friend of Kenneth Keith. During a recent conversation, Keith had brought up the Danville murders and his demeanor changed noticeably. He mentioned that on the day of the killings, he had driven to Danville to pick up medication for his wife. He also expressed guilt, noting that he had helped Michael become the owner of the pawn shop, possibly putting him in danger. Keith suggested that Dan Smith may have been the real target. According to him, Dan visited Keith every Sunday to pawn gold, often carrying large amounts of cash. Keith believed someone may have noticed and followed him, but Pastor Harold revealed something more troubling. Keith had also made bitter remarks about the Hawkins Smith family. "You and me, we're brothers, but they were crooked people," Keith allegedly said. "They always planned to take that business from me." That comment changed everything. Kenneth Keith was added to the list of suspects to verify his story. Police reviewed surveillance footage from the Good Neighbor Pharmacy, where Keith claimed he had purchased medicine. At 9:24 a.m., Keith was seen entering the store, but he looked nothing like the shooter. He wore no green jacket and had no beard, fake or real. Still, his alibi didn't entirely clear him. There was a 7-minute gap between the 911 call and Keith's arrival at the pharmacy. The trip from the pawn shop to the pharmacy took approximately 5 minutes, making it entirely possible for the killer to commit the murders and still arrive in time to establish a false alibi. Then came a critical breakthrough. Kenneth Keith owned an unregistered 2008 silver Dodge minivan, but circumstantial evidence wasn't enough. Investigators needed more. They turned again to Pastor Tracy Harold, asking him to participate in a series of recorded phone calls with Keith. Harold agreed. During one call, Kenneth Keith revealed his true feelings. "When someone's murdered, in a way like that, you want to make them into saints. he said dismissively. But they weren't. It was the first crack in his carefully maintained image, and it wouldn't be the last. Sometimes evil doesn't wear a mask. Sometimes it stands at a pulpit, behind closed doors. Pastor Kenneth Allen Keith confided to a friend, "Between you and me, they were crooked people." He spoke of betrayal, of a business deal he believed was designed from the beginning to push him out. And yet, he couldn't tell anyone else. "What would that make me look like?" he said. "Just another bitter subcontractor." But then, in a quiet moment of ego or guilt, Pastor Keith crossed a line. He began to speak about details of the case, details that had never been released publicly. "I always said I was at the party," he repeated. "I was at the party, and I was at the party." But soon after, his timeline began to unravel. Keith claimed he left Danville and returned home to Somerset. From there, he took his silver Dodge Caravan to a car wash, supposedly to prepare for a family vacation. Surveillance footage captured him walking to the cashier's counter at 10:50 a.m., smiling, calm, composed, even cheerful. At 11:25 a.m., another camera caught him pulling out of the car wash parking lot, driving the same silver van seen earlier near the crime scene. Police had enough. He was brought in for questioning and offered a polygraph, but Keith refused. His excuse: he claimed he wouldn't pass because he had once eliminated 3 targets during military service. That wasn't all. With a warrant in hand, investigators searched Keith's pawn shop. What they found was damning. A fake beard, several bundles of cash bills marked with ribbons from Dan Smith's bank money, recently withdrawn from the account of a deceased broker. 22 caliber shell casings, ballistically matched to the bullets used in the murders. All evidence pointed to one man, Pastor Kenneth Allen Keith. He was charged with 3 counts of murder and first-degree robbery. What was the motive? Keith believed that Michael Hawkins Smith and Steve Devine, his former business partners, had conspired to cut him out of their pawn shop operation. On September 20th, he drove to Danville in his silver Dodge, waited until he saw Dan Smith's car outside the shop, and then made his move. Dan was the first to die, then Michael, then Angela, Michael's wife, and the mother of their young children. After collecting the cash from the safe, Keith calmly walked out. He drove to the Good Neighbor Pharmacy, establishing a fake alibi on surveillance, then to the car wash to clean away the last traces of blood and evidence. There was no conspiracy. Investigators found no wrongdoing on the part of Smith or Devine. The betrayal Keith felt was imagined. In 2017, facing a mountain of irrefutable evidence, Kenneth Allen Keith pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But one final revelation remained. Medical records from the VA hospital revealed that the pastor had lied. He never had a brain tumor. The spiritual man who preached forgiveness and virtue had orchestrated a cold-blooded triple murder. Segment: Carol Alford and James Sooner tragedy. Love stories don't always end the way they begin. James Reggie Sooner and Carol Alford were high school sweethearts from Charleston, South Carolina, from the same grade and same school. They'd known each other since childhood. By 1959, at just 15, they were officially a couple, young, devoted, inseparable. They dreamed of marriage, and with their parents' blessing, planned to wed as soon as they turned 18. But fate had other plans. In 1962, just after graduation, James was drafted. They postponed the wedding, promising to write as often as possible, but time passed. The letters stopped. By the mid-1960s, James was stationed in Vietnam. Then, nothing, no contact, no closure. Believing she might never see James again, Carol carried on. She pursued higher education while working at the Charleston Air Force Base. Eventually, she remarried, but it ended quickly, childless. In 1975, she married Richard Alford. By 1977, they had a daughter, Rhonda, but Richard had a secret and ugly one: alcohol. violence, control. By the mid-1980s, Carol could take no more. She left him, taking Rhonda with her and filing for divorce. But Richard wouldn't let go. In 1987, after years of harassment, Richard snapped. He purchased a handgun, drank heavily, and drove to Carol's home. She answered the door. Rhonda stood just behind her. Then gunshots. Richard shot Carol multiple times in front of their daughter, then fled. Hours later, he took his own life in a remote area. Miraculously, Carol survived thanks to neighbors who heard Rhonda's screams and rushed to help. But her injuries were devastating. Multiple surgeries, blood transfusions, permanent blindness in her right eye, lifelong disability. As if fate hadn't tested her enough, Carol's health deteriorated again in the late 1990s. Extreme weight loss, pain, weakness, eventually, a diagnosis: liver cancer. During a routine medical treatment, Carol was unknowingly infected with the hepatitis C virus. The infection went undiagnosed for years, quietly damaging her liver and eventually leading to cancer. Fortunately, with proper treatment and supportive therapy, her condition was stabilized. However, she now had to take her medication daily for the rest of her life and attend regular medical checkups to adjust her treatment plan as needed. Carol's challenges didn't stop there. After suffering severe gunshot wounds, she lost her job at the Air Force Base. With cancer added to her list of burdens, she could no longer manage physically demanding work or remain on her feet for long hours. She eventually took a job as a call center operator for a cable TV company in her hometown of Charleston. Meanwhile, James faced his own hardships during his time in Vietnam. He was gravely injured in combat and nearly lost his leg. During his long hospitalization, a error resulted in his name being added to a list of deceased soldiers. Even his family believed he had died. Against the odds, James survived and returned home years later, only to find that he had lost contact with Carol. She had moved, remarried, and assumed he had perished in the war. Although James later married, his war injuries led to chronic health problems, including diabetes. These conditions left him unable to have children, and his marriage ended in divorce. He had been living alone ever since, working modest jobs on the local railroad and expecting little more from life. Then, in the fall of 2000, fate intervened. While Carol was working a routine shift at the call center, she answered a call from a customer whose voice struck a deeply familiar chord. Something about the way he spoke stirred powerful emotions in her. Despite herself, she asked the man his full name. When he said it, time seemed to freeze. James. There was a pause. Then he hesitantly asked how she knew his name. Carol, overcome with emotion, began to cry. "I'm the girl you dated in high school," she said. "The girl you once wanted to marry." Both of them were overwhelmed. They wept quietly on the line, unable to speak for a while. Soon, they discovered they were both still living in Charleston. They arranged to meet the following evening, 38 years after they had last seen each other. Carol returned home from work, that day glowing with excitement, like a schoolgirl, talking non-stop about James. According to her daughter Rhonda, she was bubbling with joy as she prepared for the date, trying on dresses, doing her makeup, and fussing with her hair. She knew she wasn't the young woman James once knew, but she wanted to look her best and win back his heart. The reunion didn't disappoint. They talked for hours, sharing everything: failed marriages, health problems, careers, and all the highs and lows of their lives. The spark was still there. Their old feelings came rushing back, and just a few weeks later, they moved in together. 5 months after that, they were married. Carol moved into James's home in the Riverland Terrace neighborhood. Life as a couple brought joy and companionship. Though both were aging and battling health issues, they took care of each other and settled into a quiet, loving life in their hometown. Next door lived the Cole family, old acquaintances of James, Stephen Cole, also a Vietnam veteran, was wheelchair-bound due to his injuries. His wife Natalie was rarely home, often socializing with friends or spending time at bars. Their daughter, Tiffany, seemed adrift, often seen wandering the streets, without money or purpose. Carol, ever warm-hearted, immediately took a liking to the teen. She felt genuine compassion for Tiffany, who appeared neglected and lonely. Carol invited her to family dinners, bought her clothes, and even gave her small amounts of money for everyday needs. She treated Tiffany like her own daughter. In 2004, James and Carol decided to sell their old Chevrolet Lumina minivan. Tiffany expressed interest in buying it, but couldn't afford the full price. Understanding her situation, the couple agreed to sell it at a deeply discounted rate and allowed her to pay it off in small installments over the course of a year. By early 2005, both Carol's and James's health had deteriorated. Doctors advised them to move south near the ocean, where the climate would be better for their conditions. With no work obligations, they decided to relocate to Florida. They sold their Charleston home and purchased a new property in Jacksonville, along with a new Lincoln Town car. The move brought a renewed sense of hope and happiness. They settled in, ready to enjoy whatever time they had left together. Carol kept in close contact with her daughter Rhonda. The two spoke daily. Carol shared every detail of her life, plans, thoughts, and updates. So when those daily calls suddenly stopped in June 2005, Rhonda immediately sensed something was wrong. At first, she tried to stay calm. Maybe they were just busy. But as the hours passed with no response, her worry intensified. She called both her mother's and James's cell phones over and over again. No answer. Each call went straight to voicemail. By the third day, Rhonda couldn't wait any longer. She got in her car and began the 5-hour drive to Jacksonville to check on her mother herself. When she arrived, something felt off immediately. The couple's car was missing. The front door was slightly ajar. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, but a light was on in one of the rooms. She called out for her mother and James. No reply. She moved through the house cautiously. The kitchen table was still set for two. Food sat on the plates, clearly untouched for days. It looked like they were about to have dinner and had never returned to finish it. The house was in disarray. Items were scattered. Drawers were open. It looked as if someone had been searching through everything in a hurry. In the bedroom, Rhonda made a heartbreaking discovery. Carol's cancer medications and James's insulin, both of which needed to be taken daily, were still sitting on the nightstand, untouched. The cell phones were there, too, both completely dead. At that moment, it became painfully clear. They hadn't left willingly. For days, no one had seen or heard from Carol and James Reggie Sumner. They hadn't been gone long, but something was clearly wrong. They hadn't taken any of their essential belongings, and it wasn't like them to be unreachable. Their daughter Rhonda, sensing something terribly off, contacted the police. The couple's vehicle was immediately listed as missing. Their bank accounts were frozen within hours, but the initial days of the search were fruitless. No witnesses, no leads, no trace of the elderly couple. They had vanished without warning, without reason. Then, on June 12th, a break. Two separate phone calls were placed to different banks. The first was from a man identifying himself as James Sumner. He complained that his card had been blocked, and he was unable to withdraw cash. The bank representative, suspicious of the timing, asked him to come to a branch in person. The caller abruptly hung up. Shortly after, a woman phoned another bank. She claimed to be Carol Sumner and echoed the same complaint. But when asked to come in, she refused, citing poor health and the urgent need to access her funds. Her tone was pushy, desperate, and unfamiliar. Both calls were traced, recorded, and immediately turned over to authorities. When police played the recordings for Rhonda, she didn't hesitate. Those weren't her parents. The voices were far too young imposters, clearly, and The stakes were now even higher, investigators theorized. Two possibilities. Carol and James had either been kidnapped and were being held hostage, or worse, they were no longer alive. Days later, the couple's Lincoln Town car was discovered, abandoned, on a desolate stretch of road, deep in the woods. No signs of blood, no evidence of a struggle. But what forensic teams did find told a chilling story. Hair strands, sweat residue, and DNA traces in the trunk belonging to both Carol and James. They had been forced into the trunk of their own car. The likelihood of finding them alive was rapidly diminishing. Then came the breakthrough. A check of recent transactions showed someone had used the couple's bank cards multiple times after they'd gone missing. ATM footage revealed a young man unknown, unrecognized, making the withdrawals. Investigators traced the phone number used to call the banks. It was linked to a prepaid SIM, purchased just before the couple disappeared. The trail was faint, but not invisible. On June 6th, that same phone number had contacted a car rental agency. A reservation was made under the name Tiffany Cole. A red Mazda RX-8 was picked up and later seen at a hotel in Charleston. Authorities moved fast. A tactical team descended on the hotel, kicking in the door to the registered room. Inside, the scene was chaotic. Shopping bags, receipts, gadgets, alcohol, clothing, perfume, luxuries paid for with stolen money. 3 young people stood inside, startled and confused as handcuffs were locked onto their wrists. Tiffany Cole, 23, her boyfriend, Michael Jackson, 24, and their friend, Alan Wade, just 19, each was separated and questioned. Initially, they denied everything. They were confused, innocent, misunderstood, but the evidence said otherwise. Inside the room were items belonging to the missing couple, their credit cards, a laptop, Carol's jewelry, James's coin collection, keys to their car, pawn shop. Receipts in Tiffany's name revealed she had sold off some of Carol's valuables and used the cash to party with friends. Presented with the evidence, Tiffany broke first. Through sobs, she confessed, yes, they had robbed the Sumners, but that was all. They hadn't harmed them, she insisted. She claimed there was a fourth accomplice, Bruce Kent Nixon, 19, who had been paid $300 to help, and then disappeared. But Nixon wasn't hard to find. He was still in Charleston, living at his parents' house. He hadn't tried to run, not yet, when police brought him in. Bruce Nixon cracked quickly. A careless comment tipped him off to how deep the trouble really was, and just how serious the consequences could be, facing the possibility of the death penalty. Nixon chose to cooperate, and what he revealed was horrifying. It had all started a few months earlier. In May 2005, Tiffany had gone to visit Carol and James to drop off a car payment. She'd known them before. They had sold her a vehicle some time back. Carol, ever kind and generous, invited Tiffany and her new boyfriend Michael to stay the night. She cooked dinner, made them feel welcome, and even gave them small gifts. That was just the kind of people the Sumners were. Over dinner, Carol casually mentioned that after selling their house in Charleston, they'd pocketed nearly $100,000 for retirement. That moment sealed their fate. Tiffany and Michael exchanged a glance. Back in South Carolina, they began plotting. Over the next 2 weeks, they brought Alan Wade and Bruce Nixon into the fold. Everyone had a role. On June 6th, Tiffany rented the Mazda. Bruce and Alan stole 4 shovels. They drove to a wooded area outside Jacksonville and dug a large, deep hole, a grave. On July 8th, Tiffany bought duct tape and rope from a hardware store and passed them to the others. That night, Bruce and Alan knocked on the Sumners' door. They claimed their car had broken down and asked to use the phone. Carol, ever trusting, let them in. What followed was a brutal betrayal. Carol was attacked first. When James came to help, he was also ambushed. Both were bound, blindfolded, and threatened. Their assailants demanded PIN codes, bank information, everything. hoping that cooperation might spare their lives. The Sumners complied, but it wasn't enough. Tiffany and Michael entered the home, helped tie the couple up, and forced them into the trunk of their own car. Alan drove the Lincoln. Bruce sat beside him. Tiffany and Michael followed behind in the rented Mazda. If the police tried to stop the Lincoln, the plan was for the Mazda to distract them. No police ever came. During the drive, James managed to free one of his arms. He removed the tape from his own face and then from Carol's, to keep her from suffocating. Still bound and blindfolded, they had no idea where they were being taken. When the car finally stopped and the trunk opened, their captors stood over them, and to their horror, two familiar faces were among them. Tiffany and Michael, the very people they had shared a meal with just weeks before. They were led into the woods, toward the grave that had already been dug. Part 1. The Florida Buried Alive Murders. The couple pleaded for their lives, desperate, terrified, but the young criminals had no mercy. In a horrifying act of brutality, they buried the elderly couple alive. According to Bruce Nixon, one of the perpetrators, it took nearly an hour to cover the bound victims with soil. As dirt was shoveled over their heads, the couple cried, professed their love for one another, and said their final goodbyes. A forensic examination later revealed the harrowing truth. The couple died from suffocation. Soil was found in their mouths, lungs, and even their stomachs, clear signs they were alive during the burial. Once the crime was complete, the group abandoned the couple's Lincoln in the woods and returned to town using a rented car. They drove to the Sumner house, stole valuables, and fled back to South Carolina to enjoy their loot. But within 2 days, all stolen cards had been blocked, and just 4 days later, all 4 perpetrators were arrested. Bruce Nixon immediately confessed. He cooperated with investigators, disclosed the burial site, and described everything that happened on that night of terror, likely hoping for leniency. Tiffany Cole claimed it was her boyfriend, Michael Jackson, who had lost his mind when he found out the elderly couple had money from the sale of their home. Her defense argued she was merely an accomplice. Jackson and Alan Wade stayed silent, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury was unconvinced by Tiffany's pleas. She had helped plan the crime, rented the vehicle used for the kidnapping, helped dig the grave, and even devised an escape plan in case police pursued them. Afterward, she pawned stolen goods and celebrated with her share of the money, even posing in new clothes and a rented limousine. In the end, Bruce Nixon was sentenced to life without parole. Tiffany Cole, Michael Jackson, and Alan Wade all received the death penalty. Appeals were filed over the years, but all were denied. As of 2023, nearly 2 decades after the crime, the death sentences still stood. Part 2. The tragic love story of Jassy and Matthew. Now let's turn to another devastating tale, one not just of crime, but of love, betrayal, and honor gone terribly wrong. In December 1994, in Jagraon, Punjab, a young man named Sukhwinder Singh Sidhu, known as Mithu, had just finished a kabaddi match. As he and his friends waited at a rickshaw stand, 3 women approached from the opposite road. 2 were older, and 1 was a beautiful young girl. When the rickshaw arrived, the girl sat in the back, and Mithu stood nearby. Throughout the ride, the girl kept stealing glances at him. Their eyes met. She smiled. So did he. Then she got off with her family, and they went their separate ways. Later that same day, Mithu heard a voice outside his home shouting for help. It was the same girl from the rickshaw. She had come on a scooter with a friend. Mithu greeted her and offered help with the scooter, though he delayed fixing it to strike up conversation. Her name, she told him through her friend, as she only spoke English, was Jaswinder Kaur Sidhu, or Jassy for short. Soon after, the two began meeting regularly. Jassy's maternal family home was one of the wealthiest in a nearby village. Coincidentally, Mithu's modest Turam house was just behind theirs, separated by a village border. Their romance blossomed, and on March 15, 1999, they eloped and secretly married in a Sikh temple, a gurdwara. Jassi returned home, acting as if nothing had changed, but her family had arranged a marriage for her that soon fell apart. After 2 months in Punjab, Jassi returned to Canada with her family, promising Mithu she would come back. The couple stayed in touch by phone, now that Mithu had a LAN installed. But in early 2000, relatives in India discovered the secret marriage and informed Jassi's family. Everything changed. Mithu began receiving threats. Jassi's mother and uncle tried to force her to divorce him. She refused. So did he. Despite temptations of wealth, cars, and luxury, neither was willing to give up the marriage. Then one day, Jassi's mother tricked her into signing papers, supposedly to help bring Mithu to Canada. But those documents falsely accused him of kidnapping, forced marriage, and possession of illegal arms. Soon, the Punjab police arrested Mithu. He was beaten in custody and imprisoned for months. His family and friends were arrested too. Jassi, meanwhile, was being held virtually captive in her home in Canada. When Mithu finally spoke to her from jail, he asked, "If you wanted a divorce, you could have just told me. Why did you lie?" Shocked, Jassi explained how her family had tricked her. Determined to set things right, she escaped her home with the help of Canadian authorities and returned to India. There, she testified in court. Mithu was innocent. She had married him out of her own free will. With her testimony, Mithu and his family were freed. Jassi vowed never to return to Canada again. The couple tried to live in hiding, knowing her wealthy and powerful family wouldn't give up easily. They moved to a new location in June 2000. That month, Mithu's family hosted a wedding celebration in their village, finally acknowledging their union. But dark clouds still loomed. Their story was far from over, and what happened next would shatter hearts across 2 continents. A quiet day in Punjab. June 8th, it was just another summer afternoon when Jassi told Mithu she wanted to go shopping. At first, Mithu hesitated. He still sensed danger lingering around them and didn't think it was safe to step outside. But seeing Jassi sit in silence, visibly upset, changed his mind. After all, she had left her entire life behind in Canada to be with him. Was it really fair that he couldn't even take her out for something as simple as shopping? So they left together. They spent the day shopping, laughing over coffee, and soaking in those rare moments of peace. But by the time they returned, the sun had already dipped below the horizon. Evening had settled in, and back at home, Mithu's family had started to worry. Then came the moment that would change everything. When Mithu and Jassi didn't return, the family went out to search for them. What they found would shatter their world. Mithu had been found barely alive, severely injured, and rushed to the hospital in a critical condition. But Jassi, she was gone, seen hospital as family members. Gathered around Mithu's hospital bed, he lay unconscious. Hours passed before he finally opened his eyes. His first question, "Where is Jassi?" What followed broke everyone's heart. In his fragile voice, Mithu told the story of what happened that day. After their shopping trip and coffee, they started heading back on their scooter. But strangely, the scooter kept stalling. He stopped twice for help from mechanics, once from a friend. But it started again until they noticed 2 men following them on another scooter. The 2 men didn't approach, just followed and then passed by. But it wasn't over. As they approached a bend near Mithu's village, a car suddenly appeared, up ahead. From a distance, it seemed empty. But as they drew near, 5 to 6 men suddenly jumped out. One of them lunged at Jassi, striking her on the head. Mithu tried to shield her, fighting back with everything he had, until one of the attackers smashed a metal rod into his skull. He lost consciousness as blood pooled beneath him. They beat him until they were certain he was dead. Then they tossed his broken body into a nearby drain. But he wasn't dead. Hours later, some laborers walking along the road noticed a barely breathing Mithu and rushed him to the hospital. Seen, June 9th, a tragic discovery while Mithu was still recovering. The worst news arrived. Jassie's body had been found 45 kilometers away floating in a canal. She had been brutally strangled. Her body was covered in deep wounds, signs of relentless torture. The police notified her family, but when shown her body, Jassie's mother, Malkiat Kaur, and her maternal uncle, Surjit Singh, both living in Canada, refused to identify her. But Mithu's family, along with Jassie's father and brother, confirmed the terrible truth. It was Jassie's scene. Investigation begins. The Punjab police immediately launched an intense investigation. Because Jassie was a Canadian citizen, pressure was high. Authorities filed charges of assault, abduction and, now, murder against unknown suspects. Soon, several individuals were taken into custody, and then, a breakthrough. Under interrogation, a local gangster named Anil Kumar confessed. He and his accomplices had carried out the attack on Mithu and murdered Jassie. But why? That's when the names started emerging, names that turned this case into an international scandal. Scene: a murder plot unfolds. Anil Kumar revealed that the original contract wasn't for Jassie, it was for Mithu. The plan was to kill him for a sum of 3 lakh rupees. And who gave the order? Inspector Jagtor Singh, serving officer in the Punjab police. But the inspector was only the middleman. The real mastermind, Jassie's maternal uncle, in India, Darshan Singh. Jassie's refusal to return to Canada without Mithu had enraged her family. Her mother, Malkiat Kaur, and uncle Surjit Singh allegedly decided that if Mithu were gone, she'd come home. They orchestrated a plot from halfway around the world. Darshan Singh reached out to Inspector Jagtor Singh, who then introduced him to Anil Kumar. Once Mithu was ambushed and believed to be dead, the assailants kidnapped Jassie and took her to an abandoned farmhouse. There, Jassie regained consciousness and immediately began asking for Mithu. When told he was dead, she wept, but still, she refused to return to Canada or denounce Mithu. The killers contacted her mother, Malkiat. Her chilling response: if she doesn't listen, kill her too. At first, the gang refused. The deal was only for one murder, but uncle offered an additional 3 lakh rupees for her execution. That night, Jassie was tortured with blades, glass shards and knives, and then she was strangled to death. Her body dumped in the canal like trash. Scene: justice begins. In total, 13 people were arrested in connection with Jassie's murder, including Darshan Singh in India. Her mother Malkiat Kaur and uncle Surjit Singh were named as the masterminds, both living in Canada. Given the cross-border nature of the crime, trials began in both India and Canada. On October 21, 2005, the Sangra court in Punjab convicted 11 out of 12 accused in India. Charges included murder, kidnapping, and criminal conspiracy. But for years, Canada resisted extraditing Jassie's mother and uncle. After a lengthy legal battle and international outcry, they were finally extradited to India in 2019 to stand trial for orchestrating their own daughter's murder. Closing words: Jassie Sidhu was just 25 years old, young woman who dared to love freely in a world where tradition was law and honor meant obedience. Her murder was not a crime of passion. It was a crime of control. A family pride turned to poison. In the end, Jassie lost her life not at the hands of strangers but of her own blood, and Mithu, the man she loved, survived. To tell her story, among those convicted in Jassie's murder case were her maternal uncle, Dharan Singh, Punjab Police Inspector Jinder Singh, and contract killer Anil Kumar. However, the legal fight was far from over. In the months following the lower court's decision, the convicted parties challenged their verdicts in the Punjab and Haryana High Court. One by one, nearly all the accused were granted bail. Ultimately, only 3 individuals, Dharan Singh, Inspector Jinder Singh, and Anil Kumar, were found guilty and sentenced to prison. But the appeals didn't end there. These individuals took their case to India's Supreme Court. On April 16, 2015, The court acquitted and discharged Dharan Singh. The remaining two, Inspector Jinder Singh and Anil Kumar, saw their convictions upheld, while the courts in India battled with the truth. Another war was being fought, one much closer to home for Mithyu. After the attack, Mithyu remained hospitalized for a long time, recovering not just from physical wounds, but from the unimaginable trauma of losing Jassi. Her last rites were carried out while he was still in the hospital. Yet the moment he returned home, Mithyu faced a storm of legal retaliation. Within weeks, a barrage of 7 different cases was filed against him, ranging from illegal weapon possession to drug-related charges. But Mithyu didn't back down, even under immense pressure from both the police and Jassi's relatives, who urged him to withdraw the case. He stood his ground. Then, in 2004, a woman accused Mithyu of rape. He was immediately arrested and sent to Ludhiana Central Jail, where he remained for 4 years. But in 2008, the court found that the rape allegation was fabricated. The woman had close ties to Jassi's maternal family and had been paid off to falsely accuse him. Mithyu was released, but the legal harassment didn't end. Several other cases remained pending, and even his brothers became targets, most of it orchestrated by Jassi's uncle Surjit Singh. In 2012, when threats and false cases failed, Jassi's family made one last attempt to silence Mithyu. They offered him 10 million rupees and 14 acres of prime land to change his testimony. Mithyu refused. He wasn't fighting for compensation, he was fighting for justice. Meanwhile, back in Canada, efforts were underway to hold the masterminds accountable. Jassi's mother, Melchiah Kaur, and her uncle Surjit Singh, both residents of Canada, were identified as the key conspirators. On January 6, 2012, police in Maple Ridge, British Columbia, arrested them for orchestrating Jassi's murder. 2 years later, on September 9, 2014, the Supreme Court of British Columbia approved their extradition to India. But the accused quickly appealed to the Supreme Court of Canada, which granted a stay and launched a new trial. Finally, on September 8, 2017, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled in favor of extraditing Melchiah Kaur and Surjit Singh to India to face the charges. Following the decision, 3 officers from the Punjab police traveled to Canada to take custody of the accused, but before they could return with them, another petition for review was filed. This legal maneuver temporarily halted the extradition, forcing Indian authorities to return empty-handed. Months passed. Then, on December 11, 2018, the Canadian Supreme Court dismissed the final review petition. After nearly 2 decades of relentless legal battles and delays, the extradition became official, with all formalities completed. The Canadian authorities handed over Melchiah Kaur and Surjit Singh to Indian custody. Justice was finally moving forward.